Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's really a real pleasure to be, number one, invited to this conference, and number two, to have the honor of heading the session and commenting on Hassan, who is a very specialized person on argumentation, and I find things in common between us, because my background is political theory, his background is argumentation, but the good news is he studied political science at different stages of his academic career, so we will have a common language, though he is much better in argumentation than myself. Hassan comes from the Sulaimani Kurdistan region in Iraq, and he is an experienced educator with a PhD in argumentation studies, and the topic was very interesting: political argumentation of political extremism. So this is a very timely topic, and he also has teaching experience and different publications. There is a long list. It's a very rich CV. So his recent publication was writing in a book titled "The Elements of Moral Philosophy," and he contributed with a chapter, and he also has refereed papers, the latest of which was "What is Extremism? Advancing Definition in Political Argumentation." He also has a forthcoming chapter in a book titled "Argumentation and Extremism." It's a book manuscript that has been accepted, and the list goes on. So to cut a long biography short, Harim, it's a pleasure to have you in this session, and please come to the podium. The floor is yours.
Is it possible to walk around, or do I need to stay here? I think better when I am walking, so.
You need the mic for the translation.
Oh, okay. Where can I? Thank you. شكرا لحضوركم جميعا، وأشكر مؤسسة القطر على سخائها، وشكر خاص لمعلقتي الدكتورة هبة عزت. Thank you all for coming. All right, so this paper, I've tried to carefully, to the degree that I can, conceptualize a new understanding of civility. So it is a systematic conceptualization of what civility in the context of argumentation is. But because I only have 15 minutes, so I'm just gonna ask some questions. Hopefully I can provoke your interest in the subject, and hopefully we can think about it. And also hopefully I will convince you to read the paper when it's coming out. So that's the mission, not introducing you to the details of the theory, because I cannot do that in 15 minutes. All right, so let's start with some questions. Or maybe the abstract might be helpful to read it. So this project developed a novel framework of argumentative civility by analyzing political argumentation's nature and challenges. It distinguishes political disagreement from other domains, focusing on civility dual role as both facilitative and potentially oppressive tool. Key inquiries include: who defines civility? Can it foster engagement without silencing dissent? The analysis integrates Western virtue argumentation theory with Islamic tradition of munazara and adab al-jadal to build a cross-cultural model for civic discourse. Ultimately, this research aimed to establish argumentative civility as a means to fostering peaceful coexistence and socio-political transformation through reasoned, inclusive debate across cultural boundaries. So the aim is taking the fact into consideration that different cultures argue differently, different civilizations have different understanding of what counts as evidence, who counts as authority, and et cetera. But since we stuck together, we live on this planet, we gotta find a way to argue and argue constructively, all right? Another part of another major aim of the project is to think critically about civility. Because if you read the literature on civility historically, civility, although when people say it, it gives you a sense that is positive, and it is positive, but historically speaking, civility used as an oppressive discursive tool. And the argument goes like this: if you are not civil, and therefore your concern is not legitimate. And historically, this argument used to delegitimize the ethos of those people, of those groups, were not served under the status quo, right? So we gotta also look at civility from a critical perspective when we connect civility to argumentation theory and argumentative virtues. All right, so now to the questions. So what kind of arguers must we be as a members of an argumentative community to engage in a productive local, intercultural, and even intercivilizational dialogue? So this question speaks to the ethos, to the ultimate goal of QatarDebate. I mean, look around you. There are people around the world, different religion, different political affiliations. Yet we are here for the sake of having a discussion and hopefully having a creative discussion, right? But then, to do that, what kind of person we need to be argumentatively speaking? What sort of virtues we need to embody to actually engage in productive and honest and serious and sometimes tough intercivilizational discussions? Because what I'm arguing for is not civility in the sense of always being polite. Of course, if you are polite in your argumentation, much better. But let's be honest, sometimes the issue is so heated. You argue with emotions, right? But still, even when we get angry, even if we get passionate about our positions, is it still possible to find some common ground to have a productive dialogue? And this is what the ultimate purpose of my theory of argumentative civility. All right, second question, which is why we are here. What is argumentative civility? And then third question, what are the preconditions of argumentative civility? So in order to answer the first question, clearly we need to answer the first question, the second question. And in order to answer the second question, we need to answer the third question. So from what's left of time, let's try to briefly answer these questions. All right, so argumentative civility. So I have like two answers. The brief one is what? It is an argumentative duty whenever one makes a claim or claims on public issues, one should provide reasons to support those claims. Right? So your private life, you are not obliged to give me evidence, arguments for why you live your life. But the moment you have arguments, you have claims on how society should be organized, and since I'm also a member of that society, then you have a duty to provide reasons for your claims, because your claims affects my life, and therefore you are obliged, argumentative speaking, to provide reasons. In detail, argumentative civility is a novel conceptualization of civility that grounded in a cluster of argumentative virtues from both Western and Arabic/Islamic traditions of ethical argumentations. Argumentative civility highlights the following points. But before I give you the highlights points, why it must come from Western and then Arabic-Islamic traditions? Why not only Western approach or Islamic approach? Well, if you want to have a framework that aims to foster intercivilizational dialogue, intercultural dialogue, that the common grounds must reflect both societies, both civilizations. Otherwise, we have power dynamics, right? So what are the highlights of this theory? Well, argumentative civility emphasizes making one's reason at least available and ideally transparent, accessible, even persuasive to opponents on issues of public significance. Again, you make a claim about public life, about political life, then give me your reasons. It reframes civility not as a mere politeness or conflict avoidance, but as an active, reason-giving engagement. Of course, I'm not arguing civility has nothing to do with being polite, being peaceful. This is a necessary condition of civility, but this is not sufficient. For civility to be a cluster of argumentational virtues, it has to do more than just encourage us to be peaceful and polite. We need to provide reasons. All right, C, argumentative civility equips arguers to pursue peaceful coexistence while enhancing or enabling socio-political transformations without delegitimizing dissenting viewpoints. Why? Well, no matter how amazing a society is organized, still there would be some people, some groups, unhappy. So there would be argumentations between those who are served by the current status quo and those who are not, right? So we need to find a framework to have a constructive dialogue. And this is what argumentative civility try to guide us on how to do that. All right, and to the last point, argumentative civility exists on a spectrum. What does that mean? It means the more argumentative virtues one upholds, the more civil one becomes. With the ideal civil arguer among us is the most virtuous. So the more virtuous you are, argumentatively speaking, the more civil you are. So civility is not about how you dress, how do you conduct yourself. No, it's about to what degree you are virtuous, argumentatively speaking. The more virtuous you are, the more civil you are. All right, what else? There's a lot to talk about it, and there is no much time. So, to clarify the definition that we just look at it, we must answer yes, to understand this definition, we need to understand politics and political argumentations. Why? Because civility, as understood here, is mainly operating within the domain of politics and political argumentations. So we gotta briefly understand what is politics and what is political argumentations in order to be able to understand how civility works in this domain of argumentations. So politics is a domain of competition, right? As Harold Laswell famously defined it, politics is about who gets what, when, and how. So political argumentation, therefore, involves persuading others about who should receive what resources, when, and how. It is fundamentally, and this is a really important point, it is fundamentally interest-driven rather than truth-orientated. Since it's central to resource allocations, benefiting some people disadvantage others. And that's why disagreement is fundamental to political argumentations. Because each participant seeks to influence that distribution in their favor, legitimate dissensus becomes an unavoidable feature of political argumentations. Legitimate dissensus simply means what? Means acknowledge that ongoing disagreement is both inevitable and normatively valuable, allowing for diversity, thoughts, and perspectives. So what does that mean? Well, if the domain of political argumentations is not about finding absolute truth, but rather it's about advancing your agenda for sake of advancing your interest, then at the end of the day, no one has the absolute truth. Because no matter what agenda you are pushing, By doing that, you disadvantage some of the people. So legitimate dissensus, basically legitimacy of disagreement, is a fundamental feature of political argumentations. Meaning, no matter how amazing a political system is, disagreement among peoples, among groups, exists forever. So we got to do something about it. And argumentative civility attempts to give us a framework on what to do with disagreement. All right, so given these features of politics and political argumentations, we must ask, which argumentative virtues will best allow us, as members of argumentative community, to navigate these differences and make the most out of them. We must also remember that disagreements over resource allocation, whether local, national, or international, can lead not just to debate, but also to violence and war, right? So we gotta take these differences of who should receive what and when seriously. Because look around you, there are wars, and fundamentally the major factor is the resource allocation. Maybe this is too early for that. All right. So it is within this context that argumentative civility, a framework enabling us to argue for change, including radical change, while remaining peaceful, becomes crucial for human civilization to engage in a meaningful dialogue and flourish, right? So the question is, how we can argue for changes in a society, even radical changes, while remain peaceful? What sort of person we need to be to achieve that? Argumentative civility try to guide us. Recognizing the norms of evidence and modes of debate vary across cultures, this project insists that a robust theory of civility must transcend cultural boundaries. Thus, argumentative civility integrates Western virtual argumentation theory with Islamic tradition of munazara and adab al-jadal to build a more inclusive framework capable of fostering constructive engagement across cultural divides. However, for argumentative civility to foster intercultural, intercivilizational dialogue, we must adhere to its preconditions. As members of argumentative community, regardless of geography, culture, religion, politics, or what have you, we must adhere to some preconditions. So in order for argumentative civility, as we discussed, to actually work, these conditions must be respected in a society or among societies. So what are the conditions? All right. Well, first, respect the principle of equal political dignity. Second, respect the principle of minimum conditions of argumentation. Third, fulfill the duty of providing reasons for all political claims. And fourth, be open to the possibility of socio-political change, or at least willing to listen to arguments for such change. And of course, in the theory, I'm explaining every preconditions in detail, but let me just give you a couple of sentences of each. So the principle of equal political dignity holds that all individuals of an argumentative community are recognized and treated as having equal worth. This equal worth is unalienable political right. Meaning, if you're human, you have this right. You have dignity, right? This principle, equal political dignity, generates the second preconditions, the second principle, of, which is the minimum condition of argumentations. What is the minimum condition of argumentations? Well, you gotta have freedom of conscience and freedom of speech. In order to have 7 minutes, all right. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk. Whenever time's up, just let me know, then I stop talking. Yeah, so what is the second principle? Respect minimum principle, minimum condition of argumentations. In order to have authentic, public argumentations, we need to have freedom of conscience, freedom of thinking, and freedom of communication, freedom of speech, right? Otherwise, the way I talk does not reflect my interest, or the way you talk does not reflect your well-being or worldview. So we gotta have this principle in place for argumentative civility to even exist. Third, I fulfill the duty of providing reasons for political claims. This is straightforward. Whenever you make a claim that affects public life, because we have equal political dignity, because your claims affects my life and I'm equal to you, please give me your reasons. You have this duty to provide reasons for me. And the more you do that virtuously, the more civil you are. And be open to the possibility of sociopolitical change, or at least willing to listen to arguments for such change, right? What is the point of injecting the market of ideas if no one listens and take you seriously? So in order to be civil, when people make claims about public life, you gotta give them benefit of doubt and you gotta listen to them. So before I continue, so if these are the preconditions of argumentative civility, and if argumentative civility is a framework to enhance intercultural, intercivilizational dialogue, then it means the members of the groups, the members of different cultures, the members of different civilization must respect these principles. Otherwise, we will not have authentic argumentation. So I will leave it to you to think about it. Are we actually respecting these preconditions? Do you actually satisfy these preconditions? If not, is it really possible to engage in an authentic intercultural, intercivilizational dialogue? So, I keep saying, in order for this framework to work, it must be supported by different civilizations, namely, the purpose of this project, Western and Islamic Arabic civilization in virtue argumentation, right? So here are some virtues. Of course, in the paper, there's a long list that is needed for this theory to work. So what are they? Well, from virtue argumentation theory, communicative openness, intellectual empathy, fair-mindedness, and critical self-reflection, right? And of course, under each category, Dr. Aberdeen is in the room. There are a list of other virtues. And from Islamic tradition, we need concise clarity. We need cooperative truth-seeking. We need spiritual mindfulness, and et cetera, et cetera. And again, in the paper, the list is long. So, what are some takeaways? Actually, I think I'm good on time. Yeah, nice. Well, the paper, this is, I hope you will remember from the talk. The paper encourages to look at civility as argumentative virtue, and by that I mean reshapes civility into a set of virtues: respect for equal political dignity, transparent reason-giving, and openness to change that bridge deep disagreement, or at least lessen the gap. Intercultural synthesis integrates Western virtue argumentation theory with Islamic adab and jadal munazara, demonstrating that shared argumentative virtues transcended cultural divides, and civility as necessity. In a competitive, interest-driven political arena, civility is not optional, but essential for peaceful advocacy and preventing escalation into coercion and violence. So the last message is, if you want to live together, we have two options. Either we use violence to eradicate the differences, or we find a common ground to actually be a kind of person that after our discussions, the best reason will emerge. So argumentative civility is a stage, so to speak, in that if we actually engage or act on it, then the best reason will emerge. And the best reason, I would believe, serve the interest of all of us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I prefer to comment from here instead of standing over there alone. And I just wanted to add some points that I want to draw your attention to. So on the argumentative bit, I will not comment much, but I will rather manage the ideas with you and do some reflection, basically, to engage. Yani, this is why I'm sitting here, man to man. Okay, so I will start with a story that maybe you will remember. It's from Plato's Republic. First chapter, when Socrates is coming back from a religious festivity, and then he was stopped by Polemarchus. And they wanted to take him to their home, and he wanted to go back to Athens. So he suggested that he wants to go home, and they said, well, you must either prove stronger than we are, or you will have to stay. So power, okay? Socrates responds, isn't there another alternative, namely that we persuade you to let us go? So persuasion vis-a-vis or compared to power. And Polemarchus replied to this is certainly a conversation stopper. What he said, but could you persuade us if we won't listen? So listening and power and persuasion, this is most of the time what we're talking about. And then who owns the territory? Because he's outside Athens, etc. So I wanted to start by suggesting to you another definition of politics than Harold Laswell's one, which you used. It's very useful for your definition of the specificity of political argumentation as originally based on interests, not emotions, but interests, okay? So you thought that this definition would help you more. I will suggest an additional definition, not an alternative one, which is David Easton's definition that politics is the authoritative allocation of values. And values here can be economic values, so the interest issue comes into the discussion, or values, status, esteem. So politics is about the authoritative allocation of values, both. Tamam? Why is it important? Because it also will help you when you are analyzing the civil and the uncivil, and definitely when you are using your examples, and maybe I would suggest to you to add to the paper the example of extremism, where actually at one point you're not like civil to civil, and we are negotiating the types of civility in a way that is part of the argumentation, but basically the civil and the uncivil when they argue. So maybe you can add classification. And then you said peace is essential for civility, but it's, you know, sometimes there are conflicts, you know, etc. But I think that you can also add when argumentation reconstructs civility after war. So coming from Istanbul, where I work, the PKK has recently agreed to sit on the table of negotiation, okay? What is this? This is not from the theoretical perspective, like only that the Turkish government is now starting to give an ear to the demands of the PKK, but also that it's reconstructing a relation with the different party that was accused of being terrorist and uncivil and violent. And so in these moments, and in civil war generally, when people actually have to reconstruct their understanding of civility from scratch and to sort of reconstruct their societies as well. So I think that maybe this definition who allocates the values and how. Maybe you'd have a glimpse at the work of Chantal Mouffe, because she serves very well the discussion that you are trying to tackle. When she talked in political theory, we have been very much celebrating the move from representative democracy to deliberative democracy, where people actually from the top to the bottom, even in local politics, are deliberating, and then there is a system of representing the different demands of different groups in society. But Chantal Mouffe was more radical, and she said democracy in itself is based on an assumption of consensus. We are building consensus. This is what it used to say. And she said, actually, we are not building consensus. We have to survive on the fact of agonistic pluralism. We will not reach a moment of consensus. So we have to survive and negotiate that. So deliberation is not the easy answer. I mean, there is a serious problem in reaching a common ground. And we have to keep trying. And here the formalistic is very important in the informal logic. You are using informal logic, but the form, and there is a very nice book titled Informality. It has nothing to do with argumentation, but it's very nice because it differentiates between the formal, the informal, and the formless. So Georg Simmel, for example, in sociology, focused on the patterns, not the content. So sometimes you have to look into the content, like the keynote speech of yesterday when it wanted to look more at the anthropology of argumentation. But sometimes also in such circumstances in politics, you have to set the form, and then the content can be different. But we have to agree on a form to sit on the table. And sometimes, and this is something that politicians know, maybe people from argumentation background do not look at, in argumentation, I assume that you have different parties or two parties, yani from two to multiple. But you don't speak about the mediator. In politics, people will not sit on the table to argue and have a dialogue without a moderator. There has to be grantors of the discussion, of the debate, of bringing the Kurds to sit with the Turks. There are mediators all the time, and sometimes they even sit on the table with both and manage. So it's not an argument and then it comes back and then we build on it. No, the mediation is a very important aspect of that, and it's part of civility. Because when do societies fall into civil war? When they don't have mediators. And I was once questioned or investigated actually by a police officer, a high security police officer in Cairo after the Arab Spring. And we had an interesting discussion, and he, at the end, I said to him, you messed things up with the coup. So, of course, for him, this is a second revolution. For some revolutionaries, it was a coup because the army interfered. So I said to him, you mess things up with this interference. I didn't use the word of the coup. So he said it was the only option. The Muslim Brothers wouldn't have left the power seat. So I said to him, yes, they would have. If you had stayed in Tahrir Square as long as they stayed 2 years ago, they wouldn't have had any option except to leave. And he said, so what is the solution from your perspective? This was 2014 when things were still maybe a step back, a step forth. So I said to him, there is no solution. He said, why? I said, because there are no mediators anymore. Everyone is burnt. Everyone's reputation is burnt. And it's like you are either with us or against us. Who would sit on the table and lead the discussion and manage the argumentation? And I said to him, can you think of any name? And he said, no. I said to him, okay, that's it. You don't have mediators. And I think when you talk about politics, this is important. Another aspect in political argumentation is time. While informal logic, when it addresses everyday argumentation forms and contexts, it's at ease. Even in the family, it's at ease. You can take time, But sometimes it's a matter of almost an Augenblick. It's a matter of almost like you have to decide now. You have to sit in the room 5 minutes and you have to decide. So the speed and the time pressure on the political argumentation is extreme. And hence, I think introducing the aspect of maybe you can make a diagram, the different factors that are added that you definitely know, they are in the text, but they need to be highlighted to give that aspect more reflection. And of course, the spatial aspect. When you're talking about And I will end with that. I had other comments, but to allow the audience to ask questions and comment, I was thinking when I was reading, you are introducing the notion of argumentative civility. And I ask you to try to highlight at the beginning of the text the difference between argumentative civility and civil argumentation. Because especially when you talked about ethics and the values, I felt like you're talking about ethical argumentation or civilized argumentation rather than argumentative civility, which needs more focus on the diversity and pluralism and the sort of different interests and the different languages, Kurds, Arab, you know, Arabs, Amazigh in Morocco, you know, the Berber or Amazigh is proper words to describe, you know, so there is also the aspect of language and the aspect of time. So I think this might be added as well. So what is the difference between argumentative civility and civil argumentation? Last but not least, we assume when we use civility from the literature of political philosophy and political theory that civility is about civil society. Not only the values, as you highlighted, but the general sort of political culture of tolerance, acceptance of the other, respect, good intentions, etc. But actually, more and more, we're talking about citizenship without the state. So though the aspect of sovereignty and regimes of sovereignty and territoriality is very present, we are aware of it, but at the same time, there are so many argumentative civility cases where actually people are outside the context of the sovereign state, or the sovereign state is not dominating the territory where it's taking place. So, and I'm very happy that you mentioned the Islamic aspect, but this will raise questions about how are you going to use that in a modern or a postmodern theory of argumentation, where actually religion is not only a provider of values, which would be nice and sweet and acceptable, but it's a frame of reference. And here you will have the debate between Habermas, who's talking about the public debates that take place and they have to use a secular language. If you are religious, you're most welcome. Wearing a veil, ahlan wa sahlan. Marhaba, bienvenue. But you have to use a secular language. And this was not enough for some other ideas on some other schools like the pragmatism yani. So Richard Rorty has a very nice article titled Religion as a Conversation Stopper. So he's not willing, he's not tolerant with what Habermas was saying. You're not welcome. Yani even your atir can be a conversation stopper. Religion is a conversation stopper. So it's not enough to say I'm going to draw from religion some values of tolerance and kindness and care and hospitality when you're discussing or debating argumentation related to refugees, for example, or asylum seekers. But actually, it's a frame of reference. How are you going to do with that? So you cannot invite it from the frame of reference context of a pre-modern Islam, if we can say so, yani, and then put it on the table without discussing the problematics that it's going to create. So it's not just, you know, flagging. We had this in the Islamic civilization. The Islamic civilization did not die. We are Muslims, we live in that society, and people can negotiate different perspectives. And also, what type of civility are we trying to build up from different subsystems of culture? I open the floor for discussion. Yes, I will start with the first hand that was raised. I enjoyed reading it. I learned a lot, and it was very eye-opening. No, maybe you can take some of the points and follow up on that on your research agenda. Later.
Thank you both for modeling argumentative civility. It was an action that I think both of you demonstrated what it might mean. But my question is, pertains to, we could be argumentatively civil. And I think your second and third preconditions, Dr. Harim, were that we had to be truthful and honest with argument. In other words, we need to provide reasons. They have to be relevant. They have to provide, whatever argumentation theory you want to follow. it has to be an argument. And I'm wondering, and this might be the role of the mediator, I'm not sure, but I'm wondering what happens when those of us who are versed in argument can use that as a vice when the interlocutor is not argumentatively savvy or doesn't understand that. So are we being virtuous in arguing that way? Are we not being virtuous when the argument itself has inherent virtue, that it could be the best argument in the world, but it could also be used to take advantage of someone who doesn't buy into that frame of discourse? So I'm just wondering what your thoughts might be on that, because both of you, I think, touched really important topics here, and one which, as you know, I'm quite interested in. So I'd like to hear the response.
All right, shall I just answer the question or wait for? Oh.
No.
Exactly. Thank you, Dr. Bolas. Well, it is an accurate observation, because the more you know about argumentation, ideally, and the expectation is the more you can do it better. And therefore, when you engage in public discourse, you may be in a position of power, because you know the rule of the game. You have the technical knowledge, etc., etc. That was a fallacy. That was a whatever. Well, that's why virtue is important, right? Specifically in Islamic tradition, argumentation is subservient of truth, right? And even in a Western approach, ethical argumentation is not just about knowing the theories of fallacies, knowing how to make a persuasive, rhetorically rich argument, but rather you need to also adhere to ethical frameworks, so that you will use your power for the sake of public good, if I may use the expression. Thanks for the question. Yes, please. Am I selecting the hands, or I'll try to be inside? Okay.
Hello, thank you so much. I enjoyed each minute. So I don't know if it is related or not. So there is hard diplomacy and soft diplomacy. How can small states claim their rights with realistic arguments without damaging their relationships, even with adversaries, when they still need to maintain a level of flexibility? For example, I saw an interview between Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister, I think. Trump said, "We will buy Canada." And the Prime Minister replied, "You can't buy it, just like you can't buy the White House." So he had every right to defend his country. But responding in this way could put him at risk. So how can a leader defend their rights with strong, realistic arguments without risking losing it? And thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. It is a challenge, and especially when the person sits next to you is Trump, right? It is a challenge, and that's why argumentation is relevant. I mean, the rhetorical side of argumentation, knowing your audience, right? How would you come across strong, but to the degree that it will not backfire, right? So I would say argumentation and dialectical approach of it, logical approach of it, specifically rhetorical dimension of it, is really important for, as you said, weaker or smaller states. Although as a Kurdish Canadian, I don't like to call my country weak and small, but in comparison to the elephant, I think we are. So yeah, we gotta know the rule of the game to manage this this power dynamic, but still also come across as strong. And I think Canadian Prime Minister did a good job by this using analogy. Exactly. All right. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for great presentation and the paper. Actually, I wanted to hear, taking on what Hebas said, the distinction between deliberative democracy and radical democracy, the move one. Yeah, how would you reflect on that actually? And when I listen to your presentation, you are more flirting with more deliberative democracy when you bring these concepts like civility and other things. But at the same time, I also hear more like radical differences, and the people cannot. There is this. The differences are so deep that they cannot even talk. So this kind of situations we have sometimes. So by just maybe I'm just putting Heba's thing. How do you say? Saying the same things what Heba said. Can you talk about that? And which side you are feeling yourself more closer to?
Between deliberative democracy and direct democracy?
Move antagonistic or yani,
I used to be very leftist, but not anymore. I mean, if there's a question, I'm still up to change, and of course. Well, you know what? What we need is a framework for people to speak freely. But freedom of speech, you can have the freedom of speech, yet use it by injecting cognitive environment with fallacious reasoning, right? So yes, freedom of speech, but also we need to educate our citizens to argue well. And speaking to Dr. Bola's comment, not just speaking well in terms of having the technicality or how to come across with a big, like, persuasive argument, but also ask yourself, is this argument a fair argument? Does it promote the interests of the public good, right? As long as the preconditions, that's my answer, that's my personal answer. As long as the preconditions of argumentative civility, as I'm elaborating in the theory, is respected, I think regardless of the political system, reason will emerge. And that will serve public good, hopefully.
So I think a lot of good points were brought up, especially the example about Trump, which leads me to my reflection on progressive diplomacy as I studied at Georgetown. And especially within the realms of argumentative civility, and how I don't think with the rise of Trump with a speaker that we can actually weigh and measure how civil someone's argument is, because this is the US president. So I feel like him, if you study his speech and analyze by psychologists and so on, and political analysis, and you mentioned the Republic and for Plato, and I think there's a good point in not just argumentative civility, but also choosing your battles. And not every battle is worth arguing for. Not just that, but there's also like the idea that we have to have frameworks. Like you said, democracy assumes a consensus, and then the consensus is up to the people, but the people are different, but our rule of the majority and so on. So I don't think it's ideal. So in those situations where diplomacy is at stake, I think more we need to kind of like move with progression. And a public speaker like Trump is very, very new in like the political scene. And I think he proposes the idea that if you look at your opponent as a mediator, you should know exactly what they can lose from you, what they can win from anything else. And then that would be the key to having civil diplomacy and so on. Because it's looks, after all, the way what you wear, your suit, whatever. It's human, so that's all.
That was a valid comment, but and can I agree with you? And we can talk more after the session, because I'm mindful of time. Thanks for the comment and observation.
I just want to close the session on a note that maybe the paper needs a case study. And maybe the case study does not need to be high politics. It might be everyday politics. And I'm not suggesting, I'm just reflecting, because it crossed my mind. I'm very interested in urban sociology. I teach it as well. And I was thinking of the work of Saskia Sassen when she wrote about expulsion, when people are driven away from poor areas that now fall in the middle of the city. And there is this, not an argument, but it's like the conversation stopper is the rule of experts. Like, we are urban planner, we have a new plan, you have to move going to compensate you. So there is not even an argument here because there is this real rule of expert as a conversation stopper, and how can we deal with such situations and look into argumentative civility and the trajectories of global capital with political interests, etc. Any cases like that might highlight the paper's ideas. And the case would be like testing your arguments. So I suggest that you choose a case study at the end to apply the sort of system of ideas that you built here. Thank you very much for your patience and your contributions and engagement. And thank you very much again, Harim Hoja. And thank you. And